And thank you for taking the time to join us on this Tuesday morning. I am Kate Landreth. I'm the educational lead with Family Caregivers of BC, and we have Wendy Johnstone, who is a gerontologist and consultant with Family Caregivers of BC, who will be our presenter today. So the webinar instructions are pretty simple. So everyone's going to be remained muted and your cameras will be off, and you can choose what name you'd like to be shown on the participant screen. You may be prompted during the webinar to provide feedback and through the presentation, and you can use, if you use your cursor of your mouse on the bottom, there should be a chat box so you can respond there. And there will be time at the end for Q&A to ask any questions. And there's a Q&A little box that you can type in your question. And you can do that at any time during the webinar, but we'll respond to them at the end.
I'm on.
Thank you. Okay, who we are. We are Family Caregivers of British Columbia, and we are a nonprofit charity dedicated 100% to the well-being of family caregivers. We are in our 30th year of supporting caregivers. We're the first in Canada, and only 3 provincial organizations across Canada who support caregivers. We have 3 main pillars. So Caregiver Support is one pillar where we provide information, referral, and navigation of the healthcare system to caregivers. There's support groups that we offer and caregiving coaching. And a lot of this now is online. And then education, which is a key component, is our webinars. So providing those to you for information. And we also launched a podcast. We have newsletters, e-news, articles, blogs, all of those wonderful things to keep you informed and to support you. And then we also do engagement and collaboration with healthcare. So looking to really integrate and support and advocate for caregivers in the healthcare system. And today we are in collaboration with Healthy Workplaces, the Canadian Cancer Society, and their mission is to eradicate cancer. And so specifically looking at caregivers in the workplace today. And we know that Canadians spend almost 60% of their waking hours on the job. So adopting healthy behaviors at the workplace is important and mutually beneficial for the Canadian Cancer Society's mission. And then if you skip to the next one, I included there are 3 kind of areas or mission or components of Healthy Workplaces, which is their website, which you can visit, challenges, which we'll get to at the very end. So we'll be doing a caregiver support challenge in September, and then consultations.
It's over to me, I think.
Wonderful. Thanks, Wendy.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me today. It's so great to see the different collaborations between organizations. And as we'll talk about today, caregiving doesn't happen in a box. It happens, can get messy, and it's usually involved with our, entire existence around, all the different roles that we play. But before we launch into that, I just want to cover what hopefully we're going to learn today. We're going to talk a bit about the definition of family caregiving and this idea of how you can help yourself identify as a family caregiver, how you can help a friend or an employee identify as a family caregiver, and why it's really important. We're going to take a look at the scope of family caregiving, and many of us may not even know that we're family caregivers, and sometimes it's a big aha moment where we realize that the things that we've been doing to support someone is in fact translates to being a family caregiver. We're going to look at some practical ways and strategies to support a family caregiver in the workplace and outside of work hours. And it's for individuals, for yourself, if you are a family caregiver, if you are an employer and you have caregivers in your workforce, which you likely do. And if you're a friend who wants to support another colleague or friend who is caring for someone else. We're also going to talk a bit about where you can find resources and supports for family caregivers in British Columbia. So the definition of a family caregiver, this is hopefully the most academic part of this presentation, is really this idea that you're a family member or a friend who provides care and support to someone living with disease, disability, or frailty due to aging. And the role and the activities that family caregiver ends up tackling is usually mutually determined by the person providing the care as well as those receiving it. Now, sometimes it's not always symbiotic like that, but that's the intent, is that the person caring and the person receiving the care, that they understand what each other is doing. How big is family caregiving? Is surprisingly, it's huge. So currently, 28% of the population is a family caregiver, which I think for some of us is a surprise, and also that it's probably a bit underreported because there are some people that don't even know that they're family caregivers. So in British Columbia alone, we're getting close to 1.4 million individuals who are caring in our province for a friend, for a family member, for a neighbor. We talk about different segments of family caregivers and some of the struggles that and the common caregiving challenges. And one of them is this idea of sandwich generation. It's not necessarily someone caring for a young child and an aging parent. That's one scenario. But really, it's this idea that a sandwich generation is that we're caught between the two slices of bread, and we end up feeling like pulled in different directions. We're trying to do it all. And we talked a bit about this idea at the very start, that caregiving doesn't take place inside its own little bubble. It happens when you're a parent. It happens when you're your own self-employed person operating a business. It happens when you're a spouse and you're trying to maintain this spousal relationship and being a caregiver. It happens when you have an aging parent or an aging relative. And sometimes it happens and you're long distance and the person is elsewhere, and you're trying to balance all of these different roles that surround caregiving, plus the act of caregiving. So it's a very common thing that we hear amongst the people calling us and connecting with us, is this idea of just feeling stretched and trying to be present and trying to do a good job in all of those parts, including caregiving. 35% of all caregivers are currently working. And so that really shows to us that this idea of having healthy workplaces, and by healthy, we don't just mean physical health. So there's 5 dimensions of health. And in order to be healthy, we're looking at our spiritual, our emotional, our physical, our mental well-being. There's one more that I'm missing. And it's this whole idea that in order to be healthy on the whole, that being able to care for ourselves in those different areas, determinants of health or well-being are really important. And so healthy workplace is this idea of bringing awareness into being a caregiver and how to maintain social connectedness, or how to reach out and find support, or small activities that you can do to look after yourself first, is really important in a workplace. So 25% of all employed caregivers can spend up to 30 hours a week caring for a friend or family member. The average might be a little closer to between 10 hours plus. But the point is that if you're providing care for someone 10 hours a week and you're working full time, there's not much time left in the day for all those other roles and even self-care. So what do family caregivers do? It can start as simple as checking in on a family member or a friend through a phone call, but then it becomes every day. And then, you're noticing some things and they need a little more support, getting their groceries, or providing more emotional support, or trying to help get them connected to the healthcare system, or helping them make decisions around future care. It can start as that, or it can be full on and you are living with an aging parent, or you're living with a spouse that requires personal care. It can be a long-term disease, it can be acute. It can be someone obviously recovering from cancer, or going through the whole process of a disease. And so it can be anything, and it's very, very broad. And so it's sometimes hard to pinpoint things. But generally what we see is that over a third of individuals are helping with things like scheduling and coordinating appointments, attending them. Almost a quarter are helping with medical treatments specific to a treatment plan. 75% help with transportation, and almost 22% provide with help with personal care. So grooming, showering. Some people are helping with feeding, various aspects of personal care. The one thing that we find common across the board with family caregivers is the idea of the time commodity. I call it, one part I call it is sort of the emotional labor of being a caregiver. So there's the physical piece, obviously, you're spending time with the care recipient, you're spending time on behalf of them. So if you're scheduling appointments, you're spending time getting to and from. And then there's the monitoring or the managing of care, the doing. There's this other piece, this emotional labor, where it's always present and we're carrying it around with us, and it's really hard to escape from the idea of how do we step away from caregiving to focus on other things, including working, including ourselves. And sometimes it can be really hard for us to make those transitions, going from, you might get up and you might be actually caring for someone, and then you're off to the office, and that might be a different room right now in your home, but if you're back in the office, you have to switch that hat and you have to get into a different space and a different role. And then, there might be something that happens during your day and you've got to reconnect as a caregiver, or you've got to reconnect, as a different role. And so this whole emotional labor, I think, is a really important piece, along with the time commodity, and how we try and find ways to balance that. So there's a lot of great positive aspects of caregiving, and we can briefly touch on those. Positive relationships between the person receiving the care and the person giving the care are often quite strengthened. This idea of gratitude around being in a position that you're able to support someone. Often we reflect on our own existence as a person, and find gratitude around our own health or our own well-being or our own circumstance to be able to care for someone. But there are consequences, and it's that whole Garth Brooks blessing and a curse combination. Being a caregiver has many blessings, but it also can be a curse, for lack of a better word. And especially for employed caregivers. So for example, often employed caregivers are having to reduce their working hours. In some cases, they decide to retire or decide to quit to care full time or through a transition. It can sometimes feel like we're less productive because we get pulled in different directions, or we're pulled away from our work. There's definitely out-of-pocket expenses that aren't covered through our publicly funded healthcare system or through various benefits that families have to incur themselves. So then there's the piece on health, which of course is really important as we're looking at healthy workplaces, and generally how do we keep ourselves as healthy as possible as humans. Family caregivers are at twice the risk of the general population to have a chronic health condition. And that can be anything, but what we often hear is a compromised immune system, because we're just running ragged and we're trying to do too much, and we're trying to, to fit in all the pieces. And we don't always have the ability to mitigate that immune system with other positive aspects like proper sleep, proper exercise, proper nutrition, staying hydrated. This can be a lot of worry around, what's going to happen or what the future holds, and that can lead to, feelings of concern. And then also there can be some depression, because we end up being isolated a bit more from our social circles. So we've touched on some of these as we were talking about this idea of overload and exhaustions around some of the experiences caregivers end up feeling. Can be difficult to set boundaries when we really care for the person. So we often say yes more than we say no. There can be complex family dynamics. It can be hard having these difficult conversations around future care, end of life, what decisions to make around treatments. Sometimes there can feel that there's this lack of support network. So people often can feel isolated, or they feel like they're just talking about their caregiving all the time, and they don't want to, burden friendships or other connections. There's grief and loss through that whole process. There can be concerns about the future, financial, legal. You have to be an expert in navigating the healthcare system, and that's a huge undertaking. And sometimes that just results in less than ideal self-care for ourselves, which oddly enough is really should almost be number one at the list, because if we're not healthy, it's very difficult for us to continue caring. So there are some key signs of caregiver stress. Sometimes caregivers are not in a position, or they're not ready yet to accept. And so there can be in denial about how bad things are. There can be anger. There can be this disconnect. There can be visible anxiety around their future. We've talked about depression. We've talked about exhaustion. We've talked about insomnia. There can be a lack of concentration when you're worried about something, or there's an acute situation, or you're worried that something is going to happen. It's hard to focus on other things. And then sometimes over time, some of those health problems can creep up. Caregiving can sometimes have a way of exacerbating a pre-existing health condition or be a catalyst. So one of the greatest challenges that we see is that family caregivers don't self-identify. That's often one of the hardest things. So trying to shift this culture, to recognize that it's okay to be a family caregiver, that regardless of whether you want that label or not, recognizing your role is really important. And also, how do we look at the caregiver as their own entity, as well as a partner in care? So first thing, family caregivers not self-identifying. And that sometimes is just awareness around what they're actually doing or what it means to be a family caregiver. Generally, the focus of the care is on the care recipient. And so often caregivers feel that they're invisible. When we offer help, sometimes the family caregiver is just not quite ready, or the care recipient's not ready to accept help. And then sometimes those other offers of help don't come again. So it's really important to know that often one-time offers usually aren't accepted, and we have to keep we have to really try and continue to offer that support. And then, as you can imagine, it's not a one-size-fits-all. And so caregivers' needs really vary. They vary over the trajectory of caregiving. They can be complex, they can be simple. And so it's trying to find the right formula to help support that caregiver. So the challenge really, of course, is, and this is, from a caregiving perspective, or caregiver's perspective, that sometimes they feel really invaluable and invisible, and which is not the case. We know that 70 to 80% of all care being given is by a caregiver. Of course, that there are other supports in place, but knowing that if you're working with someone in the workplace, or if you're an employed caregiver, or you've got a friend, to know that they're not only doing their job, but they're actually doing 70% of all the caring, for the person at home as well. And so often they feel a bit invisible in that role at times. So how do we support employed caregivers? Well, first of all, we're going to talk a bit about supporting a colleague. One of the things that is really important is actually focusing on the family caregiver first, and then the person they're caring for. Often we will hear a lot that caregivers, and rightly so, because the other individual, the person they're caring for, is sick or ill or going through a major transition. And sometimes it's a little easier to reach out on that end. But caregivers really benefit from asking how they're doing and how are they managing. And I guess the other thing I would say is that know that you might get things back that are, I'm not doing really well today. I'm having a really hard time. I feel at loose ends. I don't know what my next steps are. And so I think it's just important to know that when we start that dialogue, that it can feel a little bit uncomfortable. And we talk about this idea of reaching out, even if it feels uncomfortable. We may not know what to say all the time. And it's also really valid to say, I just can't imagine what you're going through. And I don't know, what to say, but I am here and I will listen to you. No judgment. If you want someone to bounce ideas off of, or if you want to try and problem solve, I will do that as well. Sometimes that in itself, just knowing that the support is there, is priceless for caregivers. The other thing that is really critical is listening without judgment or trying to fix a problem unless we're asked. And there's a really great video out there. I think all of us have probably seen it, the Brene Brown video that talks about the difference between empathy, and sympathy, and this whole empathy around, listening without judgment, but putting yourself in that person's shoes and just being there and validating their experiences. That's probably the most important thing for a family caregiver. Not to look at the silver lining all the time. Sometimes if they're a caregiver is asking for that type of support, or they want a bit of positivity, then absolutely, helping foster that conversation. We try to avoid things like, well, you should just try and make time for yourself, because it suggests that, it's as simple as that. Instead, we want to, say something like, it's no wonder why you're exhausted and you're having a hard time finding time for yourself. Would you be open to me suggesting some resources that might help with that? The other thing that we can do to support caregivers is asking to help in specific ways to what they need. So sometimes it's like a very specific ask, and being able to help with that request can just free up an hour or two for that individual. Referring them to resources is also really important, and actually doing a bit of research for them is often really helpful if that's what they're looking for. So supporting an employed caregiver, we think it's important just to kind of talk about the difference between how it's different than childcare. Often caring for an adult is not the same as parenting or raising a child. Just there's often some complexities around the care of an adult is usually more complex. The need for care is often due by crisis, or it's incremental. It can be very difficult sometimes to predict the type and amount of duration of care required. And that's, our focus at Family Caregivers is supporting caregivers who are caring for an adult. So this idea around supporting an employed caregiver. So how do you have this workplace that supports family caregivers? Well, there's this idea of building awareness. So having a webinar such as today, building awareness around caregiving and what it looks like, and just how diversified it is, how intense it can be, how it can creep up on us. Just increasing the awareness, really important. Having a supportive environment, and this idea of open environment where people can talk about the challenges. Most caregivers will say having flexible time to be able to complete a task or work from home, which of course most of us are already doing, but this ability to accommodate time, especially with things like appointments and phone calls, or very specific tasks that can only be done at a certain time. Respite and relief, just being able to step away from their role as a family caregiver for a moment or for a chunk of time is really important to help recharge those batteries. Access to information. So having a place in the workplace where information is visible and available for family caregivers, and bringing awareness into what exists out there. financial aid, we don't have time to get into that, but there are some programs, and having someone that can help a caregiver figure out what kind of financial aid they are eligible for would be fabulous. And this idea to know that through the trajectory that caregivers are going to need different amounts of support at different times. And so having the option to have multiple options is really helpful, because one size doesn't fit all with family caregiving. Just watching our time, and we're doing fairly well. So some of the resources that are available at Family Caregivers of BC, we have a toll-free support line at 8:30 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday to Friday. You can call, you can actually email, you can connect with us on Facebook. We have what I know I'm biased, but we have this amazing Caregiver Connection newsletter that is filled with incredible amounts of strategies and stories and peer resources. We have a great synopsis in our monthly e-news. So even printing those out or forwarding those out to a family caregiver or bringing it up in conversation would be a way that would help them, identify, or especially if they've spoken about something and you see something in the newsletter, it's often a great natural way to make a connection with someone. We've got a great flip books and tips and tools. So those are all at our fingertips. I think, Kate, maybe I'll have you connect on this September challenge if you want to pop back on for a seckie.
Yeah, so in September, and stay tuned. So if you're on our email list, we will be sending this out, and also Healthy Workplaces will also be sending this out for their networks. But it is a caregiver challenge, so how you can support caregivers, or just includes more information about self-identification, which Wendy talked about, and there's a checklist included, care inclusive workplace tips and ways to support in the workplace, how to support a caregiver at work as a colleague, and resources for caregivers. So again, that challenge will be in September, and we will let you know, and it goes out as an email, and then each day there's a specific challenge that you can partake in.
Okay, maybe we'll just quickly pop that back in terms of our caregiver support line. As we mentioned, it's available 8:30 a.m. to 7 p.m. right now with our additional COVID support. One-to-one emotional support can help navigate the healthcare system, access to support groups, virtual ones right now. We talked about the newsletter. We have some one-to-one caregiver coaching as well. So there's lots of support and options for family caregivers. That was the end of our show.
Perfect. And so we can take the next few minutes if you have, I haven't got any as of yet. Actually, Wendy, do you want me to launch that poll just to see the people that are in right now? If you want to respond, it's great for us to know what is your role right now. So if you're an employee, an employer, a family caregiver yourself, or a friend, colleague supporting, and you can choose if you're multiple, if you're a few of these, you can choose what one works or what ones, plural, work for you. Great. Okay, so we have a mix of all of them.
Oh, here's a Q&A came in here. Oh, can people outside of BC use your service if their province doesn't have these resources? I'm sure they can.
Well, yeah.
Oh, you mean the Caregiver Support line? I think the website they can, but accessing our, I think they have to have a person in BC that they're caring for. Is that right?
In terms of the support line?
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. That's a great question. I'm sure you can call. It's toll free within BC. However, yeah, I'm not sure if I would say call, and I know our support line would be able to direct you into another, if there's another area that they know of that maybe you don't at this point. But in terms of our other educational resources, which are all online, like our webinars and our blogs and support system that is embedded into our website. Obviously, it's for anyone to share and use. You're welcome. So any other questions, we're happy to respond to you here. And then, and if not, you're also more than welcome to direct any questions after the webinar to myself, and I can answer.
There's one in the chat box that says, is there financial aid for caregivers? And the short answer I would say is, well, the easiest answer is no. There are other relief programs or, there are, but they can be difficult to access. So we do have a document that we can send out as part of our follow-up packages. Oh, there's another one. Sharing the self-identification checklist. Yes.
Yeah, so I will be sending out, or it will be through the Zoom platform, but it will be Family Caregivers. There'll be resources that we'll send out. One of them will be the self-identification checklist, which will also be in our September challenge, but you'll have that too. And Marianne, I got your question in terms of getting a copy of your PowerPoint. Yes, I will. That will go onto our website as a PDF, as with this recording as well. And so stay tuned for that. That will be on our website for you. You're welcome. Thanks, Richard. Thanks for joining. Linda, is there any assistance for someone who you're caring for who does not speak English? I am her only family here who can help her mom. That's a great question.
So I think that's the specific question around, there are some organizations that do have a translator. And off the top of my head, you know, Mosaic is one of them. It depends on which area of British Columbia you're in. So sometimes I will Google, you know, translation services in my region. In the Greater Vancouver area, I know there's an organization that does have certain services available in different languages. So it also depends on the language. So I'm not sure if we can include a little section on that as well.
Yeah, Linda, I think we just had this conversation yesterday in terms of offering different languages and assistance. And we do have different caregiver support groups within the province that we work with. And so I would say if you could email our caregiver support line, they have a list of, if you're looking for a specific language, that they could support you in referring out to that organization that does support. So I would encourage you to do that if you feel comfortable with that.
Thank you for all the questions. Okay.
Wonderful. All right, well, thank you, Wendy. That was so informative and a pleasure to work with you as always.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you, Healthy Workplaces. Lynn, you're on the line, so thank you for joining and collaborating. And as I mentioned, there will be a follow-up email that goes out with a bunch of these resources that can support you moving forward. And please stay tuned. We have more webinars that are coming up in September through to December. So we're really looking forward. And we also do Facebook Lives every other, it's bi-weekly Tuesday mornings with Wendy, and she hosts specific topics which are relevant to caregivers and supporting caregivers. So thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday, and we look forward to connecting with you again.
Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thanks.